But their story didn't end there.
How could there have been only one? And he's back in business.
Is the worst idea in the history of bad ideas.
Part 2 is the final chapter in the violent history.
This time, it's personal.
Is that music?
It's a good choice.
Hey, well played.
We got no ship. No crew. How are we gonna get out of this one?
We will find hope in the impossible.
Well, at least I won't die alone. Well, that's just typical.
Let's hope this doesn't get messy.
This is where it begins, Captain. This is where the frontier pushes back.
What the hell is this?
I know why you're here. Why we are all here.
Okay, let's never do that again.
If you like space, the final frontier, teleportation, peace, war, aliens who hide things in their heads, the monotony of space travel, sabotage by the Beastie Boys, you're going to like the movie we're talking about this week. The sequel is Star Trek Beyond. This is Revenge of the Sequel, the podcast just about sequels. My name's Emmanuel.
Hey, what it is, I'm Andrew.
Hey, it's John.
And boy, howdy. This is a groundbreaking podcast, I think. Not only is it our first that isn't a horror movie, which has been our entire month, but this is our first Star Trek sequel ever. In the years that we've been doing this, in the hundreds of episodes, we've never seen a Star Trek movie or talked about one.
Yeah, there's lots. I think this is 11, 12, 13. This is the 13th Star Trek movie.
And what else could we do but cover the most mainstream version of it?
Yeah, basically, and the most latest one, the most recent one, Star Trek Beyond. Yeah,
the most recent one, but also one of the better ones, I think, movie wise. Obviously, Star Trek is one of the largest pieces of art, I guess, ever.
Physically, it's just
well, it is because it spans books. It's probably spans comics, but it all started from a TV show in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, and from there, other iterations of the show. It won an Emmy with The Next Generation, which was groundbreaking for a syndicated show. They obviously made movies as well, and then it kind of got rebooted by J.J. Abrams to be kind of mainstream and something that ended up becoming a pretty successful franchise for Paramount, at least. But what's y'all's relationship to Star Trek? Are y'all Trek heads, Trekkies? Andrew, I see you're doing the you're doing the Vulcan scissor. But Andrew, are you a Trekkie?
No, we grew up a Star Wars family, primarily, but I was still exposed to, a lot of I think it's The Next Generation with, Patrick Stewart, Picard, Captain Picard. But other than that, I think when I was younger, I didn't even know that William Shatner was the original, captain, I always thought that. I was like, oh no, it's this guy. Like it's Professor X has always been the main, the lead in Star Trek. And then as I grew up, I was like, oh shit, like it spans kind of a long time and there's been different crews and stuff like that. But that was really all my exposure. The Star Trek was that I got for Star Trek when I was younger, until these movies that helped kind of pique my interest on Star Wars as competition, so to speak, even though it's been around longer than Star Wars. Yeah. So that was about it. And then most recently, we started watching Star Trek Lower Decks, which is a CBS All Access original. I think is that what it's called?
Yeah, Lower Decks.
No. I was talking about the streaming service, but
oh yeah, CBS All Access. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's not bring up streaming services that are not, I would say, as good as Hulu.
yeah, that's fair. I heard it's turning into the Paramount one, the Paramount app or whatever now.
Paramount Plus.
That would make sense.
Yeah, but anyway, I've been watching Lower Decks, and it's kind of like Rick and Morty esque, and so that released a new episode this past week, and so it was really really funny. I actually really dug it, and so it kind of again when we start on paths like this, we kind of feel like we should go back and honor all of it, and so we've been thinking about binging the whole series on CBS so that we can get to the new Picard stuff and the new Star Trek Discovery and stuff like that.
John, I'm going to ask you about your Trek history, but before that, I just Googled how long it would take for you to watch every single Star Trek thing. And this was in 2016, so this doesn't even include all of the new streaming stuff, but there are 726 Star Trek episodes and then over a dozen movies. If you wanted to binge all those, it would take you 24 days straight, nonstop, no sleeping, and it would cost you $400. But I guess you could also just stream it on CBS Plus. So are you saying that now we have a new podcast that is going to last us years and years and years? Where we go minute by minute?
Actually, that shit, we might be striking gold here. I mean, I don't know if you're into it. I don't know if you're into it, Emmanuel, but like I've been trying to get into Star Trek. Like, let me, I guess, go back and do the history thing. Like Drew, I kind of knew from watching, we had basic, we didn't have cable growing up. So like, episodes of The Next Generation would come on, syndication and stuff, and we would kind of watch it. And it was, reruns really, because like I don't know if we ever watched it like brand new. Again, I thought like what Drew said, I thought whenever Professor X was cast in X-Men, I was like, oh, it's the Star Trek guy. It's a Jean-Luc Picard. Hell, I think at one point when I was a kid, I remember thinking that dude is Captain Kirk for some reason. Like it's just the way the names are and the name, like the very peculiar names of Star Trek, and I thought that all just blended together. I've seen more Star Trek movies than I guess I remember seeing more Star Trek movies than I think most of us have actually watched. I've seen Star Trek Generations, First Contact,
the one with the whales.
I haven't seen the one with the whales, but I've seen like the Wrath of Khan, and a little bit of the original motion picture and stuff like that. And then I've kind of known that there was the other ones, the Deep Space Nine, because I think that was currently on while I was growing up, and so was Voyager. Voyager was like I don't know if it was UPN or something. I think that would have been Star Trek Enterprise. But very intimidating like universe per se when I when I was an adult and kind of wanted to go back and explore it, because and I've been trying to get into it since college, really. I think I started the original series from the beginning when I, first got my Netflix account back in the day. It made it only into a couple of episodes, and then Star Trek, I think at the time Into Darkness was coming out. So I was trying to go back and, like what Drew said, kind of just pay respects to the source material that all this new Abrams stuff was mining. It was really hard for me to get into it. The series was pretty slow. They were very long episodes too for their time. For the 1960s, they're like hour-long episodes. But I am like all on board Star Trek now. With Star Trek Lower Decks and seeing enough of the original series to like make me want to actually watch the next episode now. So it's actually pretty cool. And back to your podcast point, that's actually a really good idea. Like that would be
wow.
I feel like that'd be
no.
Why not? I mean, that would be. We don't have to record it like marathoning in marathon format like the way we did with Star Wars, because obviously the interest isn't going to be as strong there.
How about this? If they do end up making another Star Trek movie, we can do something.
Ouch! They're still making new Star Trek stuff today.
Yeah.
Are you implying that television is an inferior format to movies?
And also, if I could suggest something, Emmanuel, you should watch the most recent episode of Lower Decks because it makes fun of the cinematic Star Trek movies.
Oh yeah,
they're in like a kind of like a danger room, like X-Men type of thing, where like it's a simulator that will simulate whatever you want, and she simulates a Star Trek movie, and it's the most hilarious thing ever.
I grew up watching. So I've seen every single episode of The Next Generation ever. I was really into Star Trek for a long time. I would have these VHS copies of every Star Trek movie, including the William Shatner ones. I don't want to spoil them, but some of them are insane. And then the Next Generation version had movies too that came out theatrically.
Yeah. Tom Hardy was in one. He was like one of his first movies, Nemesis, I think.
It kind of, I would say it borrowed a lot from the Alien franchise at one point when they were like, is this what makes space movies good? Let's try to do some of that in Star Trek. But I always enjoyed them because they invented the idea of like team dynamic, and like having a captain and having order and keep making it seem like going into space was like going out to sea. Like it was the same idea.
Same thing.
And obviously Roddenberry, the guy that made it, is that his name? Roddenberry had very different idea. He famously had clashes with the Next Generation creators because he had a very different idea of what Star Trek was. And he did not want conflict. He wanted a utopia type view of the future. And obviously sometimes that may seem boring. Like a lot of conflict is story sometimes, and war is story in these J.J. Abrams movies. But yeah, I really enjoy it. But yeah, I'm always down to talk Star Trek. And I will say this before we talk about the films that we're talking about specifically, is I also enjoy, you talk about Lower Decks, but I also enjoyed Galaxy Quest and some of the Orville. And it's crazy. Star Trek spurned these movies that were able, I don't even think they're parodies. They're just like homages or ways to celebrate what Star Trek is.
What Star Trek is. Yeah, I think even, I mean, I'm not sure, I can't remember if there's any, verbal reference on if Star Trek influenced Star Wars, but I feel like it had to, you know what I mean? Like, just because of the way it was made, like, a decade earlier. And I know everybody likes to kind of, actually, that might be a wrong thing. I could be making that up, but at least like when people that I've talked to, or even when it comes to the Abrams movies, like there's this sense to counterpart Star Trek to Star Wars. And I don't understand why, like having seen enough Star Trek now, I was like, I don't understand why they're counterparts to each other because they're very, very different. Like one of them is a medieval fantasy in space. It's a very like, classic, almost like Arthurian like quest with, wizards and, knights and good and evil. And Star Trek, while there is elements of good and evil in it, it's not really about that. It's more of it's like what you said earlier. It's like a utopia. It's a very positive, at least the concept. Some of them, not all of them are like that, but it's a very utopian view of what humanity could be in the future. Really,
it's very Doctor Who.
Yeah, I would say I mean, on the narrative side, I think a counterpart to Star Trek would really be Doctor Who, because Doctor Who started
TV show.
Yeah, it's a TV show in the 60s, and everything's canon, kind of like the way Star Trek is. Everything.
Yeah,
we haven't talked about that, but like, and then we'll get into it here in a bit. But most of Star Trek stuff that's going on today fits the canon that was created, like like in the 1960s.
And there's time travel and stuff in Doctor Who, and there's time travel that exists in Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah.
And I don't think there's any that exist in Star Wars. But Gary Kurtz, the producer of Star Wars, and George Lucas confirmed that they did think about and use Star Trek as reference as they were making the movie Star Wars. But a little bit more Flash Gordon than Star Wars is kind of what they were going for. But obviously, it was around at the time. So yeah, Star Wars is definitely influenced.
You couldn't not like, do stuff without, even when it comes to the production or aesthetic aspect, like the models of the Enterprise ship and stuff, like you would have to kind of look to that for inspiration.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about these before we talk specifically about Star Trek Beyond, let's talk about these movies, the Abrams verse and Justin Lin movie that we're going to talk about. What did y'all think about the launch of the Chris Pine Star Trek movies. Did y'all enjoy them? Were they something that you kind of think are a different category, or do they fit in with Star Trek? Yeah, John.
So at the time when the first Abrams movie, which is now called the Kelvin timeline, which is
Okay, so that's what we should be calling them.
Yeah, the Kelvin trilogy is, specifically because there's no other Kelvin timeline things happening. It's just, it's just this trilogy. When it first came out, I gotta say, and I think what, hardcore Trekkies, if they're listening to this podcast at all, or if they haven't turned it off from just our casual knowledge of Star Trek, the Abrams movies kind of, I would admit that sparked my interest in the Star Trek universe. Like, again, we've always known, or I've always known that Star Trek was a thing. It's just, I wasn't like super duper into it other than the theme song. I love the Jerry Goldsmith theme song from The Next Generation. Like, it's iconic. You can't not hear that, and you're like, oh, that's Star Trek. Like, you always kind of hear it and then associate it with the franchise. And then, but the the fact that Abrams made like a modern take on the William Shatner, like Leonard Nimoy led series from the 60s, and it's so sleek and like it's super sexed up. Like, there's action happening.
Damn. Damn, John.
Well, even when like
you're getting hard watching these Star Trek movies.
It's like it's just the way like everything is. It's made for, I think a tagline was like, not your father's Star Trek or something. You know what I mean? Like, I think that was
not your daddy's
Enterprise.
They'll pick you up.
So like those like the Abrams verse movies, like were really, really, cool, I guess. Like, they kind of re-sparked an interest, I feel like, or at least like, kind of had a gateway for casual fans like me. Like, not even, I wasn't even a casual fan now. Or back then, I guess I'm a casual fan now, trying to be a hardcore fan, but like trying to get there, in other words. But
I'll get you there.
But those movies were they're great. Like, the aesthetic was very different. Like I said, it's chaotic. The way the camera style is, like, it almost seems like the camera is moving every single frame especially in those first two movies. Not so much the third one that we're talking about, but there's lens flares. There's everyone's running. It's so actiony too, which is something that apparently you don't associate Star Trek with. Like, Star Trek isn't an action franchise by any means, unless it is. Some movies do go that route. But I thought they were awesome. And then those first two, I think, kind of age weirder now compared to Beyond, because Beyond is kind of a little bit more Star Trek-ish in a way. Like, it's not as flashy as the two Abrams films, but it's still like it's the same DNA and same kind of tone that those two movies set. And yeah, they're great. They're great movies. I'm actually disappointed that we're not going to get another. I mean, it's up in the air, but like it looks like more than likely we're not going to get a fourth Kelvin movie, but that this trilogy is kind of closed off.
Andrew, what do you think about the Kelvin movies? The Kelvin? That sounds weird. Kelvin movies? Ugh.
I agree with John. I remember, and it was funny because it wasn't just me and John going to watch this. Like, we went with a big group of friends that were the same way like we were. So I think in a way it served its purpose. It basically was breathing new life into an older property. And I think it's really cool because, when you're making a movie like this, you are obviously looking back at everything you've done and everything you've been, and you pick and choose between the best stuff and, and how to basically reinvent it or modernize it. And so it was really cool to see that in a sense. I think I like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies better than his Star Wars movies.
Definitely.
I think he's I think it helped bring new eyes to the property, and because I think that we're passionate about certain things and really, really big fans about certain things that we dive super deep in. And so when I saw something like this, it made me want to do that same diving process into a newer property that not a newer property, but a property that had been around for a long time, since before my days. It's twice as old as I am, and so it made me want to.
I think it may be 3 times as old as you, Drew.
Maybe, but yeah. And so it's really, really cool. Again, I think they serve their purpose, and to me, in a way, they kind of get better. I think as you keep going, I remember having a harsh opinion about the second one when I first saw it, but I kind of liked it. I rewatched all of them for this, and I thought the first two have aged a little bit better than I thought they were going to. And then this third one is just going to be Star Trek forever. Like, you can show this person, you can show any person that has never heard of Star Trek the third movie, and they would get you. You know, they'd be like, "Oh, okay, I know exactly what this is." And you know, it's basically their gateway into anything that's ever been in the Star Trek timeline. It takes some cool concepts and really cool modern film techniques where you're like, holy shit, like they wouldn't have been able to do this you know, a long time ago. And so it's really cool just to see the one of the final products of Star Trek, and one of the things that's going to help reinvent it, and things that people are going to look back on later and take inspiration for their new Star Trek, you know, property with this stuff.
Yeah, I agree with what all y'all said. I mean, there is something about this Star Trek franchise that's the Kelvin Chronicles, or whatever we're calling them, that's really accessible. Like, you obviously don't have to be a huge Star Trek fan and can very quickly just empathize and enjoy Kirk and the comedy that comes from Vulcans and the way that they talk with Spock. Vulcan. But yeah, I really enjoy this movie. You all brought up some of the visual stuff. Dan Mindel, I think, is the name of the cinematographer of these Star Trek movies, and he ended up making the J.J. Abrams Star Wars stuff too. But he did that, and everyone talks about lens flare a lot with J.J. Abrams. But it's Mindel has this thing that he always says, which is attack the camera. And oh gosh, Andrew's shining his light at me right now. But it's honestly not a new thing to see lens flare in movies. It happened a lot in film. You can watch a lot of old movies and actually see light stands in shots. But with digital things, you can't, you notice that a little bit more. But the idea of attack the camera is something that basically means that we're going to light this set, and instead of having to move lights all the time to fit it, because the lights are already there, and because we've already established that they can shine right into our lens, we can just shoot. We can just keep shooting, move a couple lights, but we can just keep shooting, moving the camera around and be very quick at it and get that feeling. And I think they do that in Star Wars later on too. Like, it's attacking the camera is definitely something J.J. Abrams likes to do. But this movie was not an Abrams film. It was a Justin Lin film. Someone who knows franchises. He did Fast and Furious. I mean, you can't even imagine, in terms of IP, that's like one of the biggest worldwide IPs. I would say even, honestly, bigger than Star Wars. Worldwide,
yeah, definitely.
Fast and Furious movies make more money than Star Wars movies do. And I think that it's actually insane that he even got to make a Star Trek movie. He was a fan of the franchise. And obviously, J.J. Abrams had to go make Star Wars, and he and Simon Pegg kind of spearheaded the writing and the story of this movie. But let's talk about Star Trek Beyond. What did y'all think about it? John, what did you think about this movie?
This one was kind of coming out, you know, came out in 2016. It's the most recent one. And I think before we started recording, I think, Emmanuel, you had said that you know, the trailers didn't make it look as exciting as the other ones, you know, for whatever reason. And I think I remember that too. I remember like not being totally hyped by the trailers, you know, compared to the other ones. And I think they try to fit in some, you know, Fast and Furious type of shots. Because I do remember from the trailer Simon Pegg leaping off of a torpedo onto a bridge, which is I think I've seen that shot in a Fast and Furious movie somewhere. Like, I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember which movie, but I know it was like a Paul Walker scene where he tried to jump off of a car and onto a ledge while it was falling. Beyond was great though. I enjoyed it. It was the most aesthetically kind of, you know, very similar but very different to the first two movies that preceded it. It felt very, I think, like I said, feels very Star Trek-y compared to the first two, because the first two are trying, you know, they're very flashy. They're, you know, there's action everywhere. Not to say that the action isn't, you know, gone in this one, because there's a lot of action in this one, but the way the story is like way more original. Like it's super original. It's there's an original villain. It feels like a very extended episode of a Star Trek episode. Even down to the captain's log that that Kirk says at the beginning.
The montage.
The montage, yeah, while he's speaking, and it's like a very Kirk-esque thing that you didn't get in the first two movies, because in the first two movies they're trying so hard to differentiate themselves from the William Shatner and the Leonard Nimoy versions. And this one,
I texted y'all that he actually says that being in space felt episodic.
Yeah, and I think that was like that was a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge by Simon Pegg to like the fans of the series. But overall, the movie was great. Like, I know we made people make a big deal of the lens flares from J.J. Abrams, and I think you see why because rewatching the first two movies, there are a lot of lens flares. Like, it's like an overabundance of lens flares, which is, you got to think like it's almost, he's doing it almost in a comedic sense, because there's no stopping him, and Attack the Camera is really correct. But aesthetically, this one's very different. Things aren't jumping out at you like when it comes to lights. It's not even set on the Enterprise. When it comes to the story itself, it's a pretty great movie, and it's special for a lot of reasons. I think it's the 50th anniversary of Star Trek that year that was happening. It was the the celebration. It was the last movie that you get to see two of the members, because they're tragically, no longer with us. It's the last time you see Nimoy and Yelkin in their roles, and it's and overall the movie is still pretty positive, and I guess it's a feel good movie when you watch it, and it's satisfying action wise too. They also start to pair up the characters, which if you were worried that someone didn't get enough screen time in the first two, then they usually end up having an arc in this movie.
And that's a classic thing that happened in the TV show as well. Like, right. it was, let's divide and conquer with the main group. And that happens in this, which is fun with Star Trek because you can change up the pairings a lot. But Andrew, what do you think about Star Trek Beyond?
Yeah, no, it's pretty much exactly what John said. Also, I like on how it's the grandest scale, on how human it is. I like that it's kind of like them. Right at the beginning, it's not your dad's Star Trek. They get the Enterprise taken from them super quickly and in a really, really cool way with the little hive minded or the bees or whatever they call them, but that Crawl uses. But it's really cool because it's kind of like taking Iron Man's armor away, or Captain America's shield, or Batman's money, things like that. The things that basically make them who they are, you take it away from them instantly. And so it gets to a little bit more of human levels of like, complacency, like again, everyday type of stuff where people are at a job for like a couple of years and they're like, what am I doing with my life? Like, do I really want to be doing this type of thing? So you get Kirk dealing with those very, very, Earth emotions, and even Spock, wanting to leave and, basically honor his family and stuff like that. But the pairings kind of flesh all the characters out even more so than I thought they were going to for a third movie. For a third movie, you think they're going to wrap it up, but if in this one, it's really, really cool because it pushes it forward in a way where, like, I feel confident about what a Star Trek movie could be in the future. You have about around 60 years of content, 60 plus years, whatever, of content, and how are you going to keep that from getting stale? And this Star Trek Beyond movie is basically shows you how you could do it. It's kind of like a rubric for how to honor something that is so beloved, but also take it in a new direction. And even so, it's kind of not in a new direction because it feels just like an episode out of the TV series. But it's really cool. They introduced new aliens where you thought they would just be some homage.
It's always Romulan, Klingon, or that was it.
Exactly, and so it's really cool to get new aliens like Jayla and Crawl and stuff like that, and it's again I was just kind of the third one shouldn't be the good, or I mean, statistically speaking, usually isn't good. And so for you to get the best one on the third one, and it's even a really cool like ending point also, even if they weren't going to make another one, I'd love to see Tarantino's take on a new one, and fresh characters or not, but or even another Kelvin movie. And it's funny because I think that we aren't getting one necessarily soon, but I think they could revisit it years from now if they wanted to. Just like the way they brought Leonard Nimoy back for this one, or you can bring back William Shatner in the new one, where he's older.
Bring them all.
Yeah.
Like a permanent character when you enter the Star Trek universe, like as an actor, unless you really put your foot down and be like, I don't want to be in this anymore. I think you're like a permanent person.
Yeah, well, even in like Picard, like the new show, I'm not going to spoil it, but like where it starts, it's kind of mind like boning.
It happens a lot in Star Trek. There's an episode of The Next Generation where Scotty from the originals comes in, forward in time, and then is telling everyone how they used to do it, and it becomes a episode about ageism, which I think is insane for Star Trek. But I feel like I enjoyed this movie because of what it tried to do. It definitely tried to deconstruct the idea of the Federation, and even when Captain Kirk doubts what the motivation is, and really everyone wants to leave, and which might have, I don't know how long they were on the ship for, maybe probably years, and everyone's growing restless. They're asking for promotions. They maybe just want to leave now. Spock obviously is dealing with the death of himself, oddly. So I think everyone's at that point, but I think at the end of the movie, the villain they encounter, which is 100% made up, y'all are right. Like Krall, I think, is an amalgamation of the old school Federation, the military, the idea of like isolationist and win by killing, and the idea that the way that they defeat him is by working together in the Star Trek way of multicultural, multi-special, and work together to stop that. I feel like that's a super relevant thing. Like there is a lot of isolationism and nationalism and really ugly xenophobia and like this really big us against them mentality. And I think that Krall is that. And I feel like, we all got to be Star Trek people right now and come together, whether you're a Vulcan or not. And I feel like that's what they were attempting to do. Before we started recording, John and I had a conversation because I had legit questions about the story. And I feel like that's maybe something that is the sci-fi-ness of it all, is the fact that they do introduce quite a few elements like, MacGuffins, or I'm still not even 100% sure if Krall, he started human, but now he's not. And also the weapon from the beginning also is the weapon that they needed this whole time. But I don't know how Krall knew that. Like, there's a lot of things that I just wasn't like that, but that's all plot stuff. The themes were there for me. But yeah, that's what I thought about this movie. Let's just talk about it.
The plot?
The plot's pretty crazy.
Yeah, what were you going to say, Drew? Seemed like you had a thought there.
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to tell him on what Krall was. Basically, he was the pilot of, this war hero that was very us against them type of thing, who doesn't like that now they're breaking bread with the quote-unquote, enemy, now with Starfleet, because it's not a military, basically, operation. And so, he's been feeding off of different aliens and different species to keep himself alive, and that's what he looks like. So it's funny because you're like, he's like an amalgam of things. And I was like, physically, he is an amalgam of things. So he could be Klingon, he could be Vulcan, he could be everything, And so, that's what I was gonna.
Well, how did he get that power?
Yeah, exactly. I think he says the ship. I have no clue. Okay. Yeah, on that end, but it looks like at some point, like he just does it on a whim. He grabs Sulu and it instantly starts to do it.
Starts sucking him. That's I mean, like little things like that. And then those are the things where I was like, I'm enjoying where it's going, but I was like, I should write that down because I got to remember like how that works in later.
That is one thing that kind of was like meh for me was the MacGuffin at one point because I was like, wait, what does it do? I was like, oh, it's just a weapon that destroys things, basically.
Yeah.
So that's all it boils down to. And so I was like, I don't know about that, but I think again, it's what Crawl stands for is basically what they're fighting.
Yeah. And there's also like some really big blockbuster entertaining moments that I thought were interesting. And I mean, like, they're there for those moments, like the Beastie Boys song that they play through. I love that they tried to make sure that had a purpose, and you could see how they were like, well, let's plant the seed. Maybe she has that song in her ship. Cool.
Yeah.
And then later on, they're going to need some frequency to disrupt all of these stuff. And then what do you got? You got the song from earlier, and it's a very different way of like justifying using a song. Does that make sense? And then the joke of it's classical music. I was like, all right, this is cool. But yeah, I was like, man, I like they really, really tried to make sure that was needed at that moment. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah. It's funny because when we were watching these all the trilogy, they play it in the first one, and that made it even better for me. Where I was like, oh man, like so they don't play it like in the world, like it kind of is playing over the movie, but in this one it plays in the movie.
Yeah, off a boombox, it looks like almost an alien boombox. Which is exciting because I feel like, we talk about the importance of this being like Leonard Nimoy's final appearance and then Chekhov's final appearance of this too. But I think this is around the time that, I'm going to double check, but this is also the time that the Beastie Boys guy died. Oh, I don't want to talk too much about death. John, say something else.
Oh shit! Fuck you for making me laugh like during this like transition segment.
John Barry died this year too.
Yeah, see, it's kind of sad. I mean, but it's a heartbreaking in a way, but also in the a little kind of touching because this movie kind of honors them. Like it's a very homage to all these people. Like it doesn't, I think. The crazy thing is, like, Chekhov, played by the late Anton Yelkin, was the one of the main characters of this flick. Like, he wasn't the supporting character. I feel like he was a pretty much main character on the ground with Kirk the entire time, and the wit and the humor of that when it's paired up with Kirk is awesome. And then just the whole. There's the whole Star Trekkiness about this. I keep using Star Trekky thing, but like, the point of Star Trek is to be kind of like positive and to show like, that with unity, you kind of, achieve great things. And that's the whole reason for the Federation. And that's what a complex villain in Crawl is. 'Cause Crawl's like, no, that's not what happens. Like, without struggle, you become weak and vice versa and stuff like that. Not vice versa, but you become weak and you you can lose yourself. You don't know who you are if you're never pressured into doing something. If you never feel pressure, basically in a sense. And I love that. That's the contrast to there's strength in unity and and numbers and and just the unification of what Starfleet presents.
And just the idea of peace. And I kind of, we were talking about it earlier and how Roddenberry really wanted the entire franchise to just revolve around peace. And all of these Kelvin movies kind of deconstruct what it takes to get there. And it ends up being a ton of war, like nuclear bombs, terrorism, and Into Darkness, a chemical agent that's in this movie. So it's kind of odd because it almost like just justifies the means for peace in a weird way, which is like badass people blowing things up in order to save the universe. Andrew.
Yeah, and that's that's one of my favorite quotes on the of this movie is like that describes the whole Kelvin timeline is basically this is when the frontier pushes back. And like you never ever bump into that in the OG.
Sorry. Well, it's just like I like that quote is just awesome for loads of reasons, but it's just like the unknown will, whenever you're faced with an unknown, like, to me, it's like, the unknown can over consume you, basically, like, and through fear and through, like, through, I guess, through darkness. I don't know, shit. That's a bad thing, and that if it can, overwhelm you at times, but the whole point of the stories of the Star Trek stories is to overcome that.
It's such a unique Star Trek thing to have these movies and these stories revolve around humans and like human emotions and society. Because when you think about other like space movies, not even just Star Wars, because Star Wars is like Greek gods type stuff, like who's your family, kind of things.
Who's your daddy? Literally,
who's your daddy? Palpatine. But like. It's never too internal. It's more about destiny in Star Wars, and then in a lot of things, it's more about that. But so much of this franchise in general is about humanity, and maybe even just how you as an individual react to something. That's why everyone loved The Next Generation so much, because it was like, well, how is Picard gonna be like pragmatic and do the right thing no matter what, even when it's hard?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't so much like, oh, Picard, he's destined to kill the bad guy all the time. Because spoiler alert, if you watch The Next Generation, the fleet loses just as many times as they win. And I feel like that's why it was so refreshing, is it wasn't always a happy ending. And that was like weird, especially for sci-fi, and especially after seeing, the good guys win all the time. But yeah, well, let's talk about this film and how the audience. We talked about how it didn't necessarily exceed the other Star Trek movies, not just in terms of box office, but I think just in appeal. But when I pull up this summer that this movie came out, the summer kicked off with BVS, Dawn of Justice, then The Jungle Book, Captain America: Civil War, X-Men: Apocalypse, TMNT 2. Conjuring 2, Finding Dory, Star Trek Beyond was sandwiched before Suicide Squad, Sully, Doctor Strange, Fantastic Beasts. Like, there were so many movies that came out this year, including Deadpool, like in February of this year, that it couldn't, like, it really kind of did just get shuffled in there in a weird way.
It seems like the odds were against it too, because I think some people, especially like hardcore Trek fans, were soured by the. I remember them there at the time. There was conversations that people didn't really like Into Darkness a whole lot, so I think they weren't really, they weren't holding their breath for a very good third Kelvin movie, I guess. And you're right. I think ultimately what hurt it is the fact that it was a very crowded summer for movies. You had just said it was before Suicide Squad, and Suicide Squad was like a giant hit. Like, it was going to dethrone it because of the star power involved, and also because of what the marketing was doing for that particular flick at the time.
I think that I'm just reading an article now where Simon Pegg says that. This probably confirms what I said earlier. Simon Pegg says that the studio just didn't market it correctly, and they didn't take advantage. He thinks they didn't take advantage of the 50th anniversary thing, and that stars weren't really. A lot of the actors weren't gung ho for promoting it because of the Anton Yelkin thing. Like, they just kind of were like wanting to be super respectful and felt weird, pushing his final appearance in any way. But those kinds of things added up to this movie still making a ton of money. It's like $300 something million. That's nothing small.
It's not like the numbers that, like, at the time, if your movie doesn't make, now, now your movie can make $10 million and be a success because of COVID. But at the time, when you see, if it doesn't break like at least 500,000 or something, like, you're considered a failure.
Yeah. I'm looking now, and adjusted for inflation, Star Trek Into Darkness, it looks like, was the highest grossing. But you're right, they never made like $1 billion. None of these Star Trek movies made Marvel
money
type money ever. But they're still really good, I think. I really enjoyed them. Well, let's keep talking about Star Trek Band. Is there anything else that y'all kind of enjoyed or want to talk about with this movie?
Yeah, hell yeah. I like that that Steve McQueen bike scene.
Oh yeah.
Instead of escaping the prison, they go into the prison, and it's really really badass. I love, man, that sequence alone is like that'll sell me on the movie for sure. It gets really smart with the tech that they end up using, replicating Kirk a million times, but also him using that little that jelly that hardens. I don't know what the fuck it's called. That trap that Jayla set for them. But just an all around badass sequence. Even getting everybody involved, everybody on the crew, kind of working towards this. Obviously the common goal of escaping Krall's camp and getting everybody beamed up back onto the ship, or the ship that Scotty found and Jayla. But yeah, it's really really awesome, and man, props to the VFX team and all that goodness.
Yeah, the action. Oh my gosh, this movie probably had the best hand-to-hand action of all of the Star Trek movies.
Right, yeah.
And I feel like, Justin Lin has huge success in this, of course. But yeah, I think that you definitely notice his touches there. What did y'all think about Jayla? She's a new character. I don't think she's part of any other Star Trek things. But played by Sophia Boutella. What did y'all think about her character, Jayla?
I thought it was awesome. She was probably one of the standout characters. Maybe you may be stealing the show. I think she was paired up with Montgomery Scott, Simon Pegg's character in the movie, and she seems to be kind of smarter than him. In a weird, like, childlike, primitive way, because like she's kind of not. She's very smart, but she calls people by their first and last names, and she hasn't really interacted with a whole lot of people because of her tragic backstory in the movie. Like, it's revealed that Krall killed her family, so she's kind of had to learn everything herself, which gives her this notion of this naivety basically around her. She was awesome. I think you're talking about the hand-to-hand combat scene. I think the one that you're referring to is the scene where it kind of spins around her while she's fighting one of Krall's goons. It's a very awesome scene. Yeah, she was great. And it's also like, I feel like it's a staple of Star Trek to get a very cool or badass looking alien and make them the center point of the movie for a bit. And Jayla, obviously took that crown.
Yeah, I really enjoyed her character, and I feel like she definitely had most of the charisma in the movie, and really, she was the driving force. Like, the only reason why anyone survived
Right.
was that they ran into her, and she kind of knew what was going on right away. And then let's talk about Krall, and then we'll talk, I guess, about the future of the franchise. But what did y'all think? I feel like Idris Elba was also in Jungle Book, which came out this exact same year. And I feel like in terms of and he was also in that Fast and Furious movie too. Idris Elba's in everything now, I think. Is there a franchise he hasn't touched?
Wasn't he in Zootopia also?
Yeah, you're right. He was in Zootopia.
It was like his year.
This was his year. I can't even. He hasn't been in a Star Wars movies yet, I think. Not yet, but he pretty much, I think pretty soon he will be.
He's almost there.
Yeah. But Idris Elba, I think, did good in this movie. I just felt bad. I was telling Sophia as we were watching it, I was like, man, you pay Idris Elba all that money. He acts his heart out, and he's using his really cool voice, and then you just layer on like 10 inches of makeup on his face.
But
and you're like,
but that's Star Trek though, and that's what's really cool is that like he's a really good actor, but it's because he's a really good actor that the performance was really well. He did really well. He said he leaned into like a lot of the makeup and the alienness of what Krall should be, the loss of humanity and things like that. So I thought, and again, props to the VFX and makeup department. I think they ended up losing the Oscar to Suicide Squad this year.
Yeah. Oh boy.
It's kind of a shame though that it lost. I mean, this isn't a knock against Suicide Squad. I think Suicide Squad, that's a great win for the makeup effects on that one. But the just the designs of I think they had, when it came to prosthetics and prosthetics, masks, all sorts of just makeup, like the makeup for the alien characters in this movie. I think it was double than both of the other movies. Like, I think there was more alien looking characters in this movie than there were in Into Darkness and the original Star Trek movie. So yeah, it's kind of sad that they didn't get. Well, they got a nomination, which is pretty good.
It's an honor just to be nominated.
It's an honor.
It's an honor just to be here. Thanks for letting me come.
But
let's talk.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
I was going to say something about Crawl. Oh yeah,
No, go.
It's kind of weird that you would not. I remember them announcing that Idris Elba was going to be the villain, and then when you see him on screen, you can't really tell it's him unless you really have like an ear for his voice.
Yeah.
He is very different in this role with all that makeup on there. He's not. You're not that Idris Elba plays typical characters. That's not what I'm trying to say. But you definitely wouldn't be able to tell it was him if no one told you that. At least for a while, like that it was. It was Idris Elba underneath all that makeup.
Yeah, I feel like his mannerisms made me feel like he was definitely like dangerous. Like he was always very aggressive and huge, and I'm sure it had to do with the camera angle as well. But I was like, man, I that someone good was in that underneath all that makeup, trying to act that up. Well, let's talk about the future of this franchise. So this was the last movie made, and it's already been 4 years. I'm not used to waiting 4 years for anything for a sequel nowadays. There's obviously news that Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto did sign on to make more movies if they decide to make any, and they have hired a couple directors and writers, but nothing moving forward. And also Tarantino, you brought up, Andrew, is making a pass. Obviously not directing it, but involved in making something. What do you all think about the future of the franchise? Because there's also, you're right, like you already talked about the CBS stuff, so there is Star Trek stuff. But Andrew, what do you think about the movie future of Star Trek?
The movie future, I think there will always be Star Trek, like there is Star Wars. Again, John's right about the comparison that they're kind of, apples and oranges type of stuff. But it's one of those things that just has a hardcore fan base that I don't think that it'll ever snuff out. So I think, again, Beyond really shows the potential of when done right and safely. I think you can, kind of still reinvigorate the fan base and the franchise, but also, I don't think you should limit yourself with some of these characters where, I think maybe you should, there should always be original stuff, for sure in this, which I heard that Noah Hawley was taking a swing at it, and along with Quentin Tarantino, where they're going to follow completely original characters in the Star Trek universe or world and stuff like that. So I don't think that people should limit themselves, but they should also still honor what came before them. So this is cool because, again, it's Kirk and all that, and the original crew and things like that. But I don't think that people should necessarily limit themselves, and they should take from everything. Where like give Denis Villeneuve a Star Trek movie or something, or that'd be insane. Someone like Edgar Wright or like Chris Nolan. I know some of these directors would never do a big franchise like that, but at the same time, it's just you can't help but think of the possibility when dealing with something as sci-fi-y as this, messing with space time and other worlds and stuff like that. But yeah. I mean, I'm excited, and stuff like this, like these movies, and obviously everything that came before it, makes me excited for what the future holds.
Yeah. For the future of Star Trek, I'll go ahead and echo what Drew said. I mean, I don't think it's ever going away. I mean, nothing with an IP this big doesn't ever sleep for a long time. There are the ups and downs, and I think we're at a low point when it comes to the movies, and not so much because of the quality. Like, I wouldn't say the quality dipped, between Into Darkness and Beyond. If anything, it went upwards. But there is, nowadays the audience loses interest if something else is going on, I guess. So, but luckily there are a lot of future Star Trek projects in the works. There's multiple TV series that are going on right now, which is, the original format that Star Trek was aired on was television. So I think they're taking a step back and actually, they're taking a step back and waiting to see how the shows do before they pull the trigger on another movie. Another movie will be inevitable. I think I would, because I'm now I will say that now I am a fan of the franchise. Full on, like I'm fully on board with this. I'm going to watch whatever movie is greenlighted in the future, like whether it be the Noah Hawley one. I doubt it'll be the Tarantino one, but it's cool to dream. Um, you know, or like another Kelvin one, which I think would be logically, like the way Spock would say, like logically would be the best move to just do another Kelvin movie and continue the adventures of them, because you've had they're still some of them are getting older and they're not exactly like the age that the original Kirk was at the time or something, but I feel like you can still milking is the wrong word, but so you can still kind of milk that, I guess. So I'm excited for the future of Star Trek, because there's a lot of good stuff out there in the works, and I definitely want to see more of Lower Decks, which I'm not saying that right now and then hearing actual Trekkies probably hear, or actual Trekkies probably hearing me are probably, scoffing at the fact that I'm praising Lower Decks, but it's a really funny show, and I want more Star Trek in my life.
Yeah, I think that there's Star Trek can always return to where it started, which is the serialized form and adventures in space, and I think that's what CBS All Access is. I think they have to try to figure out, because when I think Star Trek, I obviously think about the captains a lot, and I think that they maybe are trying to create that with the what is the new Star Trek show?
Discovery.
Discovery,
the main one, the main.
Yeah. The main storyline Star Trek, and I think that's exciting, and I feel like they are exploring. I mean, obviously, if they're talking to Quentin Tarantino, they're thinking like something R-rated or something very different that Star Trek's never seen before. So, but yeah, I think Star Trek is a net good, and I think we'll see it always. I don't know if we're going to see it on the big screen, and honestly, we shouldn't even be talking about the future of any movies, because there may not be a big screen in 5 years to go to. But yeah, maybe we'll see a Netflix, huh?
Possibly, yeah.
Maybe we'll see a Netflix.
The small screen.
Yeah, the small screen. Well, hey, let's wrap up this episode by talking about your final thoughts on Star Trek Beyond. I'll go first, and then I'll pass it to John, and we'll end with Andrew. But Star Trek Beyond is really, really good. It's an exciting movie. It's still filled with a lot of action that warrant the big screen, which I think is fantastic. It's really, really fun, and it has some really important and pertinent themes that honestly are still important now. And I mean, you can't get enough of just that sugar baby, but also the dynamic between Spock and Kirk and Uhura and everyone. Like you always want to see them together, but you also want to see them separately, trying to figure things out with their different dynamics. But yeah, I enjoy this movie, and I definitely feel like it's a story that could continue onward. But yeah, John, what were your final thoughts on Star Trek Beyond?
Star Trek Beyond is great. It's probably one of my favorite Star Trek movies of the of the entire franchise. I haven't seen The Voyage Home or The Final Frontier or something like that. Or
you're gonna love The Voyage Home.
The Voyage Home. I have not seen. I haven't seen The Search for Spock, but I have seen The Wrath of Khan, and that it's high up there. And I've seen again multiple episodes of The Next Generation. I am almost done with season 1 of the original series, which I'm hoping to kind of blast through that, and then so that way I can get through The Next Generation or the animated series if I'm being correct on canon, the original animated series. But Star Trek Beyond, though, I love this movie. It was great. I think I came out of this movie, came out of the theaters when watching it, and I was like, wow, this is something I would watch again. And I think I've watched it more times than I've seen Into Darkness and Star Trek. So if anyone hasn't seen it, you should go give it a shot. Even if you're not a Trekkie, I think this movie works best for non-Trekkies, really. If we're being technical. But I think Trekkies can enjoy it too as well. I mean, it doesn't try to ape off of existing storylines like the way the first two does. Not that that made them a bad thing, but it does make it, I know as soon as people hear that, they might like tune out immediately. But yeah, Star Trek Beyond is a great movie. Go see it, or if not, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but yeah, go see it.
Space, the final frontier.
Oh, nice.
These are the voyages of the starship. No, I'm just kidding. No, I agree with Emmanuel and John. It's a really, really fun movie. It's fun for the whole family. It's something new from the J.J. Abrams shtick, so it's really, those movies are enjoyable. But if they weren't your thing, I think you should give this a try. It's a little bit more Star Trek-ish than those other a little bit more mainstream. Because you can tell that J.J. Abrams was a casual fan. He even says it himself that he was more of a Star Trek fan. I'm a Star Wars fan, which is evident because he left the third one to go direct the other Star Wars movie. But you got somebody who were genuine nerd geeks, hardcore Star Trek Trekkies, Star Trek stans, whatever you want to call them, in the new director and the writer in Peg and Justin. It's really, really cool to see. Again, the way you can just make it different while it kind of, in a way, being the same. And all the homages, and I remember leaving the theater kind of sad because it felt like it could have ended. Like that was it. Star Trek was over. Star Trek is over. But also seeing the original cast in the photo was really, really nice, and just seeing it again. It's so optimistic in the way it views things, and it's got a really, really cool positive message. The Seeing it, all the them filming in Dubai was crazy. All the on how little they needed of VFX to kind of submerge themselves into the future or space and things like that. I like that it was very far from Earth, and they it's at this new base called Yorktown or whatever, and super. Really, really awesome performances all the way around, and I love on how everyone is kind of like a main character here. Everyone gets their chance to shine, kind of like Infinity War Endgame type of stuff. A little bit more equally shared screen time, but also yeah. So man, it's an all around great movie. I think if you're a Star Trek fan, you should love it because it's they're basically, I don't know how many different references are in this movie, but they took that into account, wanting to both please casual fans and hardcore fans. So, but also if you haven't seen Star Trek, I think this could be your gateway into the beyond.
Ooh, yeah. And, it ends in a nice place for everyone, honestly. Like, all of the characters, if this is it, they all kind of end nicely.
Michael Giacchino's score is the thing that takes us home there at the very end. And Michael Giacchino has done some of his best score, in my opinion, for Star Trek.
That's true. This actually has a score, like a theme that's really important for a franchise. It's recognizable. But sweet, we've come to the end of this podcast. I don't know when people are listening to this. I will say it's probably near Christmas time already. But what do y'all have to plug?
Well, if it's around Christmas time and, there's still a pandemic, obviously be safe, wear a mask, order gift cards for your loved ones instead of interacting with them, just to, stop the spread of COVID-19, which I'm fairly certain will still be around for a long time.
Yeah.
Other than that, listen to your Delphin Pod podcast. Go to patreon.com/DelphinPod and sign up for some cool shit there. Because we have cool shit online. Movie Trivia is back, and apparently we have off mic we have to discuss a potential Star Trek podcast. So if that does end up happening, guess where you'll hear it first? You'll hear it probably on the Patreon page. So yeah, do yourself a favor and go listen to that and support us. Actually, we probably would interact with you and love you forever if you did that.
Andrew, what do you have to plug?
I think that it's the holiday season and you guys should be spending time with family and loved ones safely over Skype and Zoom, chestnuts roasting on an open fire, eating turkey type of shit. But also, being very safe. The, you know, presidential election probably is over in the States, and so we probably are under new rule, maybe, or
Hopefully.
same rule. Who knows?
Or it's just over.
Yeah,
Or it's just over.
America.
This is just one of the last records of
canceled. For you Patreon users that are getting this live, then you know. You don't know what the future holds, but for those people listening to us in the future, I hope it's not that bad.
Yeah, hopefully it's not. You're not listening from a post-apocalyptic wasteland or something.
Crawl is our president now.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Crawl. Go to patreon.com/DolphinPod. Support the podcast. I believe we have a new show that's out right now called Dirt Sheet Radio, which is a wrestling podcast. That's on the public feed for everyone to hear. But obviously, Countdown to Infinity is still ongoing, and all of our other pods are out. So support us there. And if you do have a friend who likes our show too, which is crazy, if there are more than 2 of you in a bubble that listen to the show, you can go to tpublic.com, and that makes for some great Christmas presents, some stocking stuffers, baby. Ooh. Stuff that's stocking.
Stuff it up.
Hope you all are safe. We'll see you later.
Yeah, guys, later.
These are the voyages. No, all right. I'm going to stop the record.